After going over how my father behaved abusively, I want to bring that together with his personality and show how really the personality of an abuser can ultimately cause them to be abusive, as well as how that personality can reveal itself through actions that do not necessarily strike most people as abusive. I know that there are things that make a person behave abusively, for example, being an alcoholic, or I suppose being a schizophrenic, though I'm not sure whether the kind of abuse inflicted by a schizophrenic could be considered on the same level or of the same nature as the abuse inflicted by a psychopath, for example. But let me go over how I see a psychopath behaving. Basically, if you have no empathy whatsoever, that means if you cannot feel any other people's feelings, if you cannot if you can understand how they feel, but you cannot actually share in these feelings and just recognize that other people's happiness is as good as yours, that other people's suffering is something that you want to prevent, then you just won't want to prevent other people's suffering or to cause them happiness, or really you will go by your own feelings towards them as opposed to their own feelings towards themselves, towards you, and that opens the way to a lot of abuse. As in, imagine that a psychopath wants something, an object from another person. That psychopath will not really care about whether that person will suffer or feel upset, certainly, if they lose the object or it's taken away from them. Psychopath would only consider how to get it, not what suffering it might inflict. And basically, no matter how much discomfort the victim would have, the psychopath will just want to take that object. And in fact, if the psychopath has a sadistic streak, then the psychopath will actually be happy to cause suffering to the victim, because they just cannot possibly feel the victim's own suffering. They are blind to it, in a sense. Likewise, if the psychopath needs someone to feel shame in order to get something out of that person, well, the psychopath just won't mind playing mind games, causing guilt trips. It won't make a difference whether the victim will deserve to feel guilt or not. They will just want to cause guilt in order to obtain some result. And likewise, they won't care whether the victim, feels pain. If the psychopath, for example, if the psychopath needs the victim to feel hurt for whatever reason, that psychopath will inflict pain. And part of what this means is that the psychopath doesn't really have any noble ideals at all. If they experience greed, they will satisfy that greed as best as they can. If they experience lust, likewise for sadism, and just generally every vice imaginable, they will try to support it just because it's their feeling and they cannot understand other people's feelings. By contrast, they won't ever want to genuinely help people. They may try and fake kindness and compassion, and I would argue that they always fail at that to some extent, but they will never have it in their hearts to actually do something good for other people. And that pretty much shows in how they choose their professions and how they choose their friendships. Basically, if you see a person in the street laugh at another person's misfortune or suffering, even if it's something as trivial as laughing about how someone slips on the snow, I think that's a good sign that the person in question is, evil. And likewise, if a person just shows carelessness towards others or shows feigned kindness whenever it suits them, or does so randomly without rhyme or reason to that, then that person is probably also abusive. I guess what I'm saying is that I see a lot of people who are perfectly happy with those around them to cause minor acts of evil, of sadism, I guess, and indifference to other people's suffering, and to not cause any good at all. And I think, just as Hitler said that you can believe, common people tend to believe that small lie, what am I saying? Basically, Hitler said that common people will believe in small lies, as in they will be able to look out for them and identify them, but they won't believe in the existence of big lies. They won't be able to notice them because they're so used to dealing with small lies but not with big lies. So I think, in a sense, people might be able to notice the psychopath's behavior, or certainly the behavior of evil individuals who are slightly suppressed by morals that they'd rather not have. They can see these things, but they won't be able to actually put them together and see that minor actions are nevertheless an indication that major actions also have the potential to occur. As in, if there's no constraint placed upon you to act in an unethical way, and you act in an unethical way in trivial situations, then if you're put in a position of authority, you will behave unethically as well, I would argue. And it surprises me that when people read about, for example, the recent oil spill, I say recent even though it's been a year already, by British Petroleum in the Gulf of Mexico, when you read about how the lawyers who handled the victims' complaints actually handled them and tried their best to avoid damages to British Petroleum, when you see how Barack Obama, for example, pretty much swept away most of his campaign promises and never lived up to them, and when you see how bankers in the UK retired rather, with huge pensions, even as the country was sinking because of the recession that they themselves had caused, and I could go on, then when people see these things, they don't really understand how, if a person who behaved abusively in smaller ways were to take office, they would be doing similar things out of self-interest. They don't really make the connection between small acts of evil and large-scale acts of evil, just as Hitler said, and I think he's right in this case. They don't make the connection between small lies and big lies. I think honestly, having spent so much time really in the presence of my father, not that I could have any choice on that, I saw how people appreciated him. So some people, of course, others just left him, and that would be very wise of them. It does happen to narcissists to actually be left by most of the people that initially liked them. When I saw how these people accepted them, even though he behaved in ways that were rather crude, that were callous, just small things he did, but there were a lot of them. Well, it surprises me because I can say that these small acts of cruelty and contempt, but just came from the same personality that inflicted all the abuse that it inflicted against me, against my mother. So I'm just bothered when people shrug off the minor acts of evil that other people carry out. For example, I don't tolerate people who lie at all, unless they somehow end up being put through so much pressure that they dissociate and just lie because they don't feel they have any other choice. But people who lie habitually to get something, or just because they like it, there are people who actually like lying, that pretty much shows that they're abusive in nature. And the same goes for people who don't mind intimidating others in certain situations, or for people, I guess, who don't really care about looking at other people's point of view. So whenever you see small scale actions, think about how the person would behave if they were allowed to manifest their actions at even a global scale without any sort of impediment. And then you will understand whether or not their personality is actually a good one or an evil one. You will be magnifying their personality as though, I guess, looking at it through a microscope. And I find that having done that, it has helped me distinguish good people from evil ones, and it, I think, has helped me identify the potential for very bad situations and help me prepare accordingly. I guess I'm going to conclude with that. I would like to talk some more on this issue because I think it's an important one. People just ignore those who cause suffering, and as a consequence allow suffering to emerge over and over again. So in the next video or two, I just want to go into greater depth about that. Well, thanks for watching this, and see you next time.